Welcome to the Greenville County Library System's first virtual local author expo. If you've ever been to our in-person expo, we're going to try to recreate that vibe for you online tonight. I'm coming to you live from our Greer branch in their cozy quiet room, complete with a fireplace. This expo is our kickoff event for adult winter reading. You can sign up right now to participate from our website, greenvillelibrary.org. The Winter Reading Challenge lasts until March 1st. The challenge consists of a bingo card, and one of the squares is attending this very event. So go ahead and mark that square off at the end of this evening. You can also complete a square by reading a book by one of our local authors. So if you see something new tonight, go ahead and request that book so you can read and check it off. We want to encourage all of our wonderful adult patrons to cozy up this winter, read for fun, and earn some prizes, like this limited edition winter reading mug. You can also earn prizes from our sponsors, Swamp Rabbit Cafe and Grocery and Greenville Swamp Rabbits Hockey. Tonight's local author expo and the upcoming Meet the Author events are generously sponsored by the Friends of the Library and Emrys. The Friends of the Greenville County Library System is a 501c3 organization that provides financial and volunteer support for public programs and publications of the Greenville County Library System. They do this through fundraising projects. And they've graciously provided funding for this event. You can become a member of the Friends to earn a discount at the Friends shop and special access to book sales. For more information, visit greenvillelibrary.org/friends. The Emrys Foundation builds a vibrant literary home right here in Greenville, South Carolina, for writers and readers to celebrate diverse voices and the power of words. They offer scholarships, conduct contests, and hold writing workshops throughout the year. Please visit emrys.org to learn more about their cause and support their efforts. If you enjoy this expo, you'll love our upcoming Meet the Author events throughout winter reading. Mary Adkins will be presenting a writing workshop Thursday, January 21, 6:30 to 8 p.m. You'll get to hear more from one of tonight's authors, Deb Richardson Moore, on her newest novel later this month, Tuesday, January 26. That also starts at 6:30. Gary Jackson will give a talk and amaze us with a reading of his poetry. That's Thursday, February 4th, also 6:30. And finally, Catherine Smith, who you'll get an introduction to this evening, will be speaking about her latest book, Baptists and Bootleggers, on Sunday, February 23rd, also at 6:30. Make sure you register for all of these events and so much more at greenvillelibrary.org/events. To welcome our selected authors for this expo. We're going to start off this event with each author briefly speaking about their work and their writing or publishing process, and then we'll open the floor to you, our viewers, for interactive questions, just as you would do if you attended the expo in person. Please use that chat function at the bottom of your screen to ask questions as you think of them, and we'll keep track of them for you. While the authors are speaking, please make sure that your video and audio are muted. Be sure to watch the chat for links to the author websites and their social media presence so you can learn more about them and discover more of their books. Let's begin our author features. Okay, so our first author of the evening is Paulette Alden. Paulette Bates Alden is the author of 2 collections of autobiographical short stories, Feeding the Eagles and Unforgettable, a memoir, Crossing the Moon, and a novel, The Answer to Your Question, which won the Kindle Book Review's 2013 Best Indie Book Award in the suspense category. Her writing has appeared in New York Times Magazine, Plowshares, Mississippi Review, the Antioch Review, and elsewhere. She's the recipient of a Book of the Month Club Fellowship, a Bush Foundation grant, a Loft McKnight Award, and several Minnesota State Arts Board grants. A former Stegner Fellow at Stanford University, she taught as a Jones Lecturer in Stanford's Creative Writing Department. For many years, she taught courses in fiction and memoir writing at the University of Minnesota, where she received a Distinguished Teaching Award. Until 2016, she critiqued short stories, novels, and book-length memoirs as a freelance editor. In 2016, she and her husband, Jeff, moved, and in Paulette's case, back to Greenville, South Carolina, where she was born and raised. So Paulette, we'll leave it to you.
Thank you. Can you see me? Is everything working?
Looks perfect.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Rachel, and thank you to the Greenville Library for inviting me. As Rachel said, I am a Greenville writer, born and raised here, but when I left Greenville for college, I just kept going. And I always came back to see my parents when they were alive, but it was only 4 years ago that I moved back to Greenville. One of those visits back many years ago, I was just sort of in the library here in Greenville, and I came upon a remarkable article, a piece of reportage by Rebecca West in the New Yorker. The New Yorker had sent her to Greenville in 1947 to cover the trial of the 31 taxi cab drivers who were accused of lynching Willie Earl. I had never heard of this, even though I was born the same year that he was lynched. And I was amazed and fascinated to know that this lynching had taken place in Greenville, where I had been born, where my father had a radio and TV store on North Main Street. And I was also so impressed with Rebecca West writing about Greenville. I had never seen Greenville through someone so literary as Rebecca West. And I began to think about the Willie Earl lynching and trial, and I couldn't get it out of my mind. And I began to think about writing a novel, not about Willie Earl himself, or even any of the people who knew him or loved him perhaps, but about people on the periphery of that situation, but who were impacted by it and changed by it. And so the result of that initial impulse to write about it became the novel, The Empty Cell, which I published this September. And it has four main characters. There's Lee Chastain, who is one of the lynchers. There's Alma Stone, who is a Black woman who loved him when Willie was a child. There's Lawton Chastain, who's a fictional prosecutor at the trial. And then his daughter, Betsy, who is 17 when the taxi cab drivers are acquitted in trial right here on Main Street in the courthouse. And all of these characters are affected by what happened to Willie Earl, and that became the novel. As I was writing it, it's set in the Jim Crow era in the late 40s and into the 50s. I began to feel that I couldn't just leave the characters in that kind of dark hole when civil rights was still just in the very formative beginning. So I took the book through to 1960 when the civil rights movement came to Greenville in the form of lunch counter sit-ins. And I have a little epigraph at the beginning of the book that says, "I made a world I knew, but not the world I knew, and told a story there." And that really is a rather enigmatic kind of quote, but to me, it spoke so much of my experience, which is that I knew Greenville, but I really didn't know Greenville. And as I worked on the book and researched it, and I both came to know a great deal about the Greenville I had grown up in, and I also could call on a kind of sense of Greenville that I had from being a child here. And that became the book, and I've lost track of whether I've spent my 5 minutes, but if you have some questions about it, I'd be happy to talk later.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. And as a reminder to everyone, remember you can ask questions specifically of these authors that you hear. If you hear something in their story that strikes your fancy, make sure that you ask it in the chat, or of course to all of the authors in general. So our next author is Ellen Bache. So Ellen Bache is the author of 9 novels, including Safe Passage, which was made into a movie with Susan Sarandon, and 2 short story collections, one of which won the Willa Cather Fiction Prize. So Ellen?
Okay. I started to say, I realized when I was thinking about this that I've been writing for 40 years, more than 40 years, which was kind of astonishing to me. I started in the early 1970s as a newspaper freelancer, partly because the work was something I could do at home. I had two toddlers at home. I think some people can identify with that. And so I was able to do that, but I really wanted to write short stories. And at that time, there were short stories every month in the big women's magazines like Redbook and McCall's and Mademoiselle. And I just loved them. But it took me a long time as a self-taught writer to learn to write them. And I would send them out and they'd come back with form rejection slips. And this went on for 6 years. And finally, McCall's took my very first short story, which was published in 1981. And I continued to publish short stories for many years until that market dried up. And in the meantime, I wanted to learn to write a novel. And finally, I did sell a novel. It was called Safe Passage, and it came out in the late 80s. And it was about a family back home in Maryland waiting to hear the fate of their son and brother, who's a Marine, over in Beirut when the airport there was bombed by terrorists in October of 1983. That's a real event, but the story that went with it was about the family dealing with it, and that was fiction. And so in the mid 90s, the book was made into a feature film starring Susan Sarandon. It was just the most astonishing thing to me. And it was just a thrill. It was fun. It was lucrative even. And it was a wonderful boost. You know, you as a writer, you always feel insecure. And when something good happens, it encourages you to go on and do more of your work. So I have written now, I think it's 9 or 10 novels over all these years. And it's been a wonderful long career. People often ask me who haven't read my work, what they should read first. And I don't really know what to tell them because everything that I've written, each book is different. One, you know, there's the Safe Passage about the terrorist incident. There's a book about forest fire. There's a holiday book, and there's just a whole selection, thank goodness. But lately, I was working on this very serious project about women who run a domestic violence shelter. And it just occurred to me that this is not a book that the world needs right now, that what people need is something light and fun that will take them away from the worries that we have about our jobs or the pandemic and so forth and so on. So I've been suggesting that people read my one and only comic novel, which is called Over 50 Singles Night. Here it is. I think you can, I don't know if you can see it or not, but that's the cover of it. It's a romp, really. It's about two sisters, one's 62 years old and one's 55. And the younger one has moved in with her sister to try to regroup. And that's fine. The sisters love each other. They get along very well. But the older sister does not want her sister spending the rest of her life with her. So she's going to get her out of the house in the kindest possible way, which is to find her a new husband. And the way she is going to do this is she starts basically a social event where no doubt plenty of eligible bachelors will come to whisk the sister away. Well, that is not exactly what happens. What happens is most of the people that show up are elderly, very, very elderly women from a retirement center who've come because they are anxious to have a meal out instead of in their dining hall. And one of them chokes as she's eating, nothing serious, but she loses her dentures. And so it's not exactly a successful evening, and it goes downhill from there. And of course, because it's a romance, it has a happy ending, and it's a kind of sweet book, and it's fun. And so it's one that I hope you might take a look at. The library has copies. You can buy it on Amazon. There's a Kindle version. And I just think it's the fun one to read first if you're in the mood for being taken out of the situation. And anyway, thank you for having me. I look forward to hearing everybody else.
Thank you so much, Ellen. That does sound fun. So if you're looking for a good escape, make sure you check that one out. Very good. All right, our next author is Evie Everest. So Evie Everest is a best-selling tween to teen fantasy author. Ever since she discovered the summer reading program, she's been unstoppable. After all, if books contain worlds, she's pretty much an intergalactic traveler, right? When she's not visiting other worlds or inventing her own, Evie enjoys drinking too much coffee, playing her trombone, and petting her 4 fur babies. So everyone welcome Evie Everest.
Hi everyone, I'm Evie Everest. Thank you for coming today. It's exciting to be in a group with so many accomplished writers. My debut novel came out this year, so I only have 2 books out right now. The first is 7 Crowns, which is a YA sci-fi and fantasy book. And the second is 365 Awesome Story Prompts, which is what it sounds like. I'm a big sci-fi fantasy nerd. I always have been. So, you know, the best question you could ask me at the end of this is who my favorite doctor is from Doctor Who. But I grew up around a lot of that with my older brother and my dad. They were big into that, so I became into it as well. I've been told my book is a little bit of sci-fi, a little bit of fantasy, and a little bit of dystopian. So that's really all I have to say. I'll keep mine short.
Thank you so much. That's great. So to discover more, of course, check out those links posted in the chat. Thank you, Evie. So our next author is Paul Michael Garrison. Originally from the Midwest, Paul Michael Garrison has spent roughly half his life in upstate South Carolina. In addition to writing and editing, he has worked in the fields of higher education and website management. He wholeheartedly endorses the Oxford comma. Paul Michael holds degrees in publishing, theater, and creative writing. His short fiction has appeared in Wendover and Quantum Fairy Tales, and he frequently performs with the Greenville Shakespeare Company. Whether on stage or in writing, he enjoys the art of becoming someone else. Letters to the Editor is his first novel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel. Letters to the Editor is a classic mystery novel. It follows the investigation of a young but jaded detective named Kate Baxter as she looks into a series of death threats made against a prominent magazine editor named Nathaniel Carver. He's the former editor of a magazine called Truth Will Out. So he's kind of made his career exposing the secrets of other people. But as Kate continues to investigate, she realizes that some of the people close to him have a lot of secrets of their own. It's been described as a quick read, full of twists and memorable yet relatable characters.
Thank you. That's great. So gosh, my to be read list is getting out of control now. I'm adding everyone's books to that. Thank you so much for sharing with us. And again, as a reminder, post in the chat if you've got questions for specific authors or for everyone. Our next author is Emily Golis. So Emily has been dreaming up fantasy worlds since before she could write her name. A New England transplant now living in the Deep South, she is fascinated by culture and the way it shapes how individuals see the world. Golis aims to create stories that engage, inspire, and reassure readers that the small choices of everyday life matter. Her first novel, Escape to Vendor, debuted in 2017 and won the CELA Award for Young Adult Fiction. Its sequel, Mists of Paracosmia, followed in April 2019. Golis lives in upstate South Carolina with her rock climbing husband, an awkward cat, and 2 adorable little boys. Thank you for joining us tonight, Emily.
Thank you. So my first novel came out in 2017. I started writing it in 2001. So you can start doing the math there. And there's a whole long story about how that happened. But the premise of the book, Escape to Vindor, is what if the fantasy worlds that you created, children create or teenagers or whoever, what if the fantasy worlds that you created actually existed somewhere in another dimension? And what if you could visit? And so that's the premise of the first book. The second book, the first book follows the adventures of Megan Bradshaw, who gets trapped literally in her own imagination. The second book is about her brother who ends up in his sister's world. So there's, and some of the fantasy characters escaping from Vindor and then inhabiting our world as well. So one of the things that I'm really passionate about is because of this whole idea of building worlds and it is how to help and inspire other writers to, particularly fantasy and science fiction writers. How do you create worlds? How do you create cultures? How do you figure out what people eat and where they sleep, and if needed, where do they go to the bathroom, depending on what kind of world you're creating. And so I have written on that topic on my blog. I can say it's a really cool website because I didn't build it. So I have a really, really cool website that someone else built for me called worldofvindor.com. So I'm really interested in that. The other thing I'm interested in, since it took me so long to get my first novel publishable, get it to the point where I had a lot of rookie mistakes and I had to rewrite the whole thing from the beginning and all of that. When I was younger, I used to think that the point of writing was just basically you had to go professional if it was of any use. Publication is your goal because otherwise you're wasting your time. And after going through that entire process, by the time I finished my book and had it rewritten and where I wanted it to be, I decided, if this is where it ends, if it never gets published, it totally would have been worth it for the value that it brought to my own life. And so I'm a big proponent of, you should write for your own edification. You should write, you don't have to play music because you want to, be in a professional band one day. You need to do music or art or writing because of the benefits it gives you as a person. So I'm very happy to talk about those things. Again, I had a very long process. Interestingly, the second book, I got a 2-book contract and the publishers were like, we'd like to publish both books. And I'm like, the second one's not written yet. And they're like, okay, well, that's fine. So first one took me about 13 years to write, plus some years of editing. And then the second one took me a year and a half. So I improved my process over the years. But anyway, I love to talk about the arts. I love to talk about the benefit to your own soul for creativity, no matter what your professional goals are. And I'm really nerdy about world building and, what do people eat and all those sorts of details. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Emily. That's great. I love to get a behind the scenes peek at what's going on, and that writing process is incredible. And thank you so much. All right, our next author is Colleen Hall. There we go, Colleen Hall. Colleen Hall is a displaced New Englander who came south to attend college, where she met and married a Southerner. She never returned to the North to live. She now resides in the upstate of South Carolina with her husband and family, 3 horses, and 2 very spoiled cats. She's the author of Her Traitor's Heart and Wounded Heart. Thank you for joining us tonight, Colleen.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I feel like I'm in very illustrious company. I don't have a long list of credentials behind me. I just wrote because I enjoyed it. I've been writing since I was a child, but I didn't get published until 2017. I write historicals because as a child, I was one of those weird kids who wondered what it was like to live in the past. What would it be like to live in a world that didn't have electricity, didn't have running water, that kind of thing. And so I based my novels in the past in things that interest me. My first novel, Her Traitor's Heart, is set in the early days of the Reconstruction. It's right after the Civil War. And I'd always try to set my novels in some type of event in our nation that impacted the characters. Coral has a very difficult time getting used to the way her life is now. She's herself was poverty stricken. They were completely devastated. And she had lost her husband, her father, her brother, and a fiance in the war. So she was very bitter. And so I like to portray how these events would actually impact my character. My second book, A Wounded Heart, is placed out in the West. And of course, since I have horses, I love horses, and they play an important part in the story. But also it takes place in 1870 with the Indian Wars and the Army's battle to make the West safer for white settlers. So I try to portray both sides of the issue, how it would be, you know, the Indians losing their land and white people coming in. And my heroines have to be rather brave, because in this book here, Della is a socialite from the East who wants adventure. So she leaves her Eastern home and goes west, where she doesn't even know how to do her own hair. She doesn't know how to dress herself because she's had a maid all her life. So she has a lot of things to learn and hardships to overcome. My third book coming out in December of 2021, and that's Warrior's Heart, and it also goes into the Indian Wars, but toward the end, where we have a lot of the heroine has to overcome her grief, the loss of her husband, learn how to live on her own, and learn to love again. So I always have struggles that my characters have to overcome. But the thing is, they get in my head. Probably other writers can experience this, that your characters become so real that they don't do always what you want them to do. And so sometimes I have to create different scenes or leave scenes away. And they bring up things in my story that I didn't always plan, because they're their own people and they just kind of do their own thing. So that's kind of an interesting thing to me. So anyway, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. We appreciate you coming and your time. That's wonderful. Our next author is Sally Handley. Sally Handley is president of the Upstate South Carolina chapter of Sisters in Crime and the author of the Holly and Ivy Cozy Mystery Series. The fourth book in the series, Tuscan Blooms, was just published, but she's going to tell us more about that in a moment. An avid reader, Sally has been a mystery lover since she read her first Nancy Drew and Trixie Belden books as a young girl. A resident of Malden, South Carolina, she devotes her time to writing and gardening, and also writes a blog on writing, reading, and retirement. Thank you for joining us tonight, Sally.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. And as you mentioned, I'm very proud to announce that the fourth book in my series, Murder Under Tuscan Blooms, that's, I don't know if the cover is visible, but I don't have any books yet, and the book is not in the library yet, but it will be as soon as I get them. But the first three books in the series are in the library. But starting today, Murder Under Tuscan Blooms is available on Amazon.com. If you don't know anything about my books, the Holly and Ivy Mystery Series is a cozy mystery series. So it is an escape type of book, which is exactly what I've been reading throughout this pandemic. I too have not wanted to read anything heavy, dark, or difficult. My sleuths are two sisters who are middle-aged, and they are they look alike, which leads to some interesting incidents in the books, especially in the first novel of Mistaken Identity. At the start of the series, in the first book, Second Bloom, the sisters are both at a stage in their life where they're starting to feel a little bit vulnerable about the aging process. But as a result of getting pulled reluctantly into a murder mystery and solving that murder mystery, they find inner strength, renewed purpose, and a little romance. And they experience a renaissance at a time in life when some people kind of give into that, the limitations of aging. And my sleuths are not, they don't have superpowers, but their unique life experiences help them to help other people. Now, I mentioned romance. So this is kind of a spoiler alert if you're starting with book one and you haven't read any of the others, but you know, a cozy mystery that always has romance in it and you know where it's headed, okay? In book four, Holly has married, well, in book three, at the end of book three, Holly has married Detective Nick Manelli. And in book four, they go to Tuscany for their honeymoon. And they are honeymooning at Nick's family vineyard, the Fattoria Manelli. Okay, perfect place for a honeymoon, right? Until a long lost cousin comes back to make his claim on the vineyard. And again, this is not a spoiler alert. At the end of chapter one, he dies. Was it an accident? Was it murder? Can they figure this out? Or is the honeymoon over? That's the question, okay? Now, how did I come up with my idea and my setting for this story? 2 years ago, a friend of mine actually invited me. She called me up and she said, you know, Bruce, that's her husband, Bruce and I are going to Tuscany. We're renting a villa. We have plenty of room. We'd like you to come. And I thought, oh my goodness, I can't do that. And then after about 2 minutes, I thought, oh my goodness, I have to do this. So I went, we had a wonderful time. And that's where I got the idea to set the honeymoon in Tuscany. Now, what I actually did was smoosh together the villa that we stayed in and the vineyard that we visited. And that became what is the setting in the fictitious town of Caprilli, where I placed the book. You know, I have to tell you, out of the 4 books, this was the one I had the most fun writing. I actually couldn't wait to get downstairs in the morning and finish breakfast and start working on this because I loved the characters, I loved the setting, and it was like through my imagination, I was able to travel, which I couldn't do during this pandemic lockdown, right? So I was having a lot of fun writing this. And there are certain things from the trip that I actually used. For example, I named one of my characters Matteo, and Matteo was the owner of the vineyard that we visited. And we had just the most lovely wine tasting after they took us on the tour of the vineyard. And he came out with a bottle of red wine and he goes, this is our all-day wine. Well, we just loved that because what he meant, it was their everyday wine, right? But we bought several bottles of their all-day wine to enjoy while we were there. So the first of the book in the series is called Second Bloom. The second is Frost on the Bloom. And the third is Full Bloom. And I just, if you are a Kindle reader, I just want you to know that I put Second Bloom, the first book, permanently for sale for 99 cents for anybody wanting to start the series from the get-go. So that's available right now. And, you know, I have a blog on I'm a terrible blogger, I have to tell you. I can still remember when I found out that they said you really should be blogging like, you know, once a week. And I thought, oh my God, I can't possibly do that. And I have become an occasional blogger, but the blogs are there. Except that this morning, I had to tell you, my website is sallyhanley.com. I went to add my new book to the website and now my homepage disappeared. So I'm hoping I'll get that corrected. These are the perils of being a self-published author, right? You have to do all this stuff yourself. I'm hoping that'll be corrected very soon. But in the meantime, you can find me on all the social media sites and on Amazon. I have an author page on Amazon. So I look forward to any questions you might have. And I thank the library very much for this opportunity to speak to you all.
Thank you so much, Sally. That's great. And congratulations on the brand new publication. It's perfect timing.
Yes, yes.
All right, our next author is Emily B. Martin. She splits her time between working as a park ranger and an author illustrator, resulting in her characteristic eco-fantasy adventures. An avid hiker and explorer, Her experience as a ranger help inform the characters and world she creates on paper. When not patrolling places like Yellowstone, the Great Smoky Mountains, or Philmont Scout Ranch, she does live in South Carolina with her husband Will and 2 daughters, Lucy and Amelia. She is the author of Sunshield, Creatures of Light, Ashes to Fire, and more. Thank you for joining us tonight, Emily.
Thanks so much, Rachel. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to be with so many other awesome upstate authors. My bio pretty much says it all. I work as a park ranger during the summer times, 2 summers in Yellowstone and 2 summers in Great Smoky Mountains, 3 summers in Great Smoky Mountains, if you count my college work. And then a lot of research in about a dozen others across the country. And all of that time spent in those places really is just infused throughout my novels. My very first book is Woodwalker, featuring a ranger type character, because write what you know, right? And it's very much a quest to reclaim a stolen country. And then the 2 books that follow in that trilogy, Ashes to Fire and Creatures of Light, are sort of the subsequent chapters of that story, following up the overall arc of this world and this story. And then my most recent book, Sunshield, came out last year. And these are all 3 published through Harper Voyager, which is the sci-fi fantasy arm of HarperCollins. And Sunshield is also set in the same world as Woodwalker, but it's a generation in the future. So we're dealing with some new characters. And this is also very much an eco-fantasy kind of nature nerd adventure, but in new country in the world and new characters. And the sort of Twitter pitch for this book, Sunshield, is a desperate outlaw, a sheltered diplomat, and a political prisoner find their paths crossing on a quest to expose a system of corruption. So that's the basis of the book. And the sequel to it, Flood Path, comes out in March of this coming year. So, and that's the duology, it's just the 2 books. So that's been a lot of fun to work on. It's been very bizarre publishing this year and last year, as I'm sure many of the other authors here can attest to. But it's exciting to have the duology sort of wrapping up. I'm also an illustrator, and my most current work is working on a middle grade novel that will be published through Macmillan coming next year, 2022. And it's called The Field Guide to Mermaids. And it's a kind of nature, science / fantasy look at different aquatic real aquatic environments throughout the United States. But looking at them through a fantasy lens with what kind of mermaids would be living in these different aquatic habitats. So that's how my kind of nature background, my work as a park ranger, sort of threads throughout my storytelling, my illustrating. They all 3 very much work together to create what I write on paper. So thank you very much.
Thank you. That sounds so exciting. I'm a big fan of mermaids, so I'll be checking that one out. And to all of you viewers watching too, duologies are a great time commitment, and you don't have to wait forever and ever for like the 7th book in a series to come out. So that's always a great thing to start with. Our next author is Charles Pate Jr. So Charles Pate Jr. is a professional artist living here in Greenville, South Carolina. And he mostly works in paintings and sculpture, but he's always loved children's books with beautiful illustrations. This past year, he self-published his own, and he's very pleased with how it turned out and hopes that you will love it too. So this is our representation for our children's author. Thank you for joining us, Charles.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. I don't know if anybody is young enough to have watched Sesame Street or old enough to have had children who watched Sesame Street, but I don't know if you remember, there's a segment called One of These Things is Not Like the Other. I think that's me on this whole screen. I have no writing background and no accolades to brag about, which is okay. But I have always been interested in children's books and the illustration side of that, the writing side of that. I have 2 young children. I kind of, about the time I had my son, I realized how poor a lot of children's books are. They're kind of, there are a lot of what I would say not very great books out there. And so, like a lot of artists, I had some delusions of grandeur and then said, well, I can do that. I can make it myself. I am an artist. I do painting and sculpture. I have some work around Greenville that you may have seen, some bronze things on Main Street down in the Cancer Survivors Park. Actually have a piece being unveiled on the 19th, so that's exciting. But the pandemic, as terrible as this has been in so many ways for a lot of people, including myself, it did afford me some time to do some things that were a little bit different. My wife works in the hospital, and so her job was not going to change at all, and mine was very much became the job that was could be put on hold when the kids had to stay home and stuff. So I became pretty much a full-time stay-at-home dad this last year. And so I wrote and illustrated this book called The Lizard's Gift. And yeah, and I said, I'm just gonna make this happen. And I looked a little bit into publishing, which I know nothing about, decided to self-publish it. I did a Kickstarter. I raised 200% of my goal in the first 72 hours. And so I said, awesome. And Emily said something earlier that really spoke to me, which was like, I basically was like, I don't care if I make any money. I just want this to be real. I want to have one that my kids can read, and I want to hand out a bunch to friends. And I've been amazed at actually having some success with it. And there's one of these books in 40 something of the 50 US states. So I feel happy about that. But it's a book about a lizard. He's a chameleon, and he is feeling a little vulnerable, that he doesn't feel special, doesn't feel unique or gifted. So he goes and he meets a lot of other animals, and they greet him with a lot of love and friendship. He still feels that he's lacking. He can't fly, he can't swim, he's not very big. There are all these things that he can't do. And then ultimately he ends up meeting this ape here, this like very kind, wise ape that explains to him that he is special, and that that each person greets him with love because he's friendship, and that his gift can be friendship and stuff. And that so there's a lot in there about self-esteem and self-worth, and about friendship and love and kindness, and a lot of I think really good themes for little kids, but not in any way that's like too abstract for little people. And I do think the illustrations are pretty good, if I say so myself. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy with that. And I do actually have a second book. So in the Cancer Survivors Park in downtown Greenville, there's a lion sculpture. I did that big lion sculpture. And my mom and I kind of came up with an idea, and she wrote the words for it, and I'm illustrating a book that's going to come out about a child who gets cancer. And it's, that's going to be a very kind of niche audience, but it'll be for parents who need to talk to their kids about childhood leukemia, or a classroom if somebody all of a sudden is not coming to class anymore because they're going through some treatments or whatever. So very, very sweet book. I'm excited about that one too. But for now, if anybody wanted, if you know any little tiny people or grandbabies or anything like that, since this is self-published, you pretty much have to contact me directly. I do have links on social media stuff. Yeah, that's my book. So thank y'all for letting me pretend to be an author with all of you pros, and that's all for me.
Thank you, Charles. So let that be inspiration to all of you aspiring writers who are watching too. You can always self-publish. That's definitely an option. And thank you, Charles, for sharing your talents with us in Greenville in so many different ways. And I know I love the Cancer Survivors Park, and I know that means a lot to a lot of people. So if you are in Greenville, you should definitely check that out. So thank you so much. Our next author is Jordan Poss. And just read this. Jordan Poss is a native of Northeast Georgia and an alumnus of Clemson University, where he earned an MA in European history. He currently teaches European and American history at Piedmont Technical College in Greenwood, South Carolina. and has previously taught at Greenville Technical College and Spartanburg Community College. He writes historical fiction in his spare time and has published 3 novels and a novella to date. He completed his 4th novel last year and is currently revising it. So thank you for joining us, Jordan.
Thanks, Rachel. I appreciate it. And thank you to the library for hosting this again. I'm thrilled and honored to get to participate. Yeah, I write historical fiction and listening to everybody else's kind of amazing stories, and how they approach the material. I was kind of reflecting on that. And for me, most of my ideas come from just both my academic work as a historian and as a novelist come from the same question, which is, what was it like? I want to know what it was like to live through things. So, I mean, we all had the high school football coach history teacher, who just made you memorize the dates. And that, I always tell my students it's the worst way to learn history. I try to make it, kind of real and human for them, because these are actual events that real human beings lived through, and where you can only bring out so much of that in a strictly academic historical writing. A novelist is free to really bring you into the inside of history, right? And put yourself in the mind and in the heart of a person who might be long dead. So I've got 4 published books, and I am revising my 4th full-length novel very glacially right now. They range widely. I'm a military historian, and so I say the good thing about being a military historian is that there's a lot to study. The bad thing about being a military historian is that there's a lot to study. But I range from ancient Rome with that novella, which is just a look at the very last day of the great statesman Cicero's life, dramatized through the eyes of one of his household slaves. A ghost story from medieval Iceland, which is my first published novel. One that that's a world that I still kind of mentally just go and inhabit sometimes. But about a Englishman living in exile among the Vikings who has to go kill a ghost, which is being able to actually kill off a ghost is maybe not a category we have as modern people. So go check it out. As well as a World War II kind of classic commando thriller set in Norway. So if it's old, if there's a high body count, and if it's set in a remote, desolate, cold place, I am going to take an interest. But my most recent book, and certainly my most personal, is Griswoldville, which I'll try to hold up here, which is a Civil War novel set in my home state of Georgia. And the inspiration for it, this is one of the earliest instances in my memory I can think of that, what was it like instinct. As a kid, going to the local library back home. So again, thank you, libraries. Got a book off the shelf about the Civil War and read about a battle I had never heard of, fought in Georgia. And it was the only stand-up kind of infantry on infantry battle on Sherman's March to the Sea. The only time that the Confederates, and specifically the Georgians, tried to stop Sherman's army. And it was at a very small industrial town called Griswoldville, which is out. It's not there anymore, but it's still a kind of neighborhood outside Macon, Georgia. And what grabbed me about this was a couple of things. There were, the Union Army, the Union soldiers who were there were entrenched. They had repeating rifles, which gave them a ridiculous firepower advantage. And then at the end of the battle, as they had repelled these Confederate attacks, they figured out that these weren't just any soldiers, they were local militia, amateurs. And it was made up, this group was made up almost entirely of boys and elderly men, like the last males left out of the Southern white population at the time. And that made a really distinct impression on me. So years went by, I couldn't even remember the name of the battle or the location. I just knew it was March to the Sea, old men and boys, and just kind of the tragedy of that, but it stuck with me. And then later, revisiting the Civil War as a graduate student at Clemson, I learned more about it. And that germ that had been planted years and years and years before began to grow some things. And then finally one day, I'm not saying you should do this, but this is what happened to me. One day during Sunday school, this idea just popped almost fully formed into my head, and I outlined it in a notebook. And a couple of years later on from that, I began drafting it. So it's the story of a young boy from Madison County, Georgia, which is close to where the Passes have lived for 200 years or more, since the colonial period. He's a young boy living on a farm. His father goes off to fight in, the real armies up there in Virginia. And so he and his mother and very young brothers and his grandfather are left to look after the place, which is a very common circumstance during the Civil War. And so it just follows their family for a long time. The war is very, very far away, but slowly things begin to change. Things begin to, they get into tighter and tighter straitened circumstances until finally the enemy is knocking at the doors, right at the border of the state of Georgia itself. And the narrator, Georgie Wax, is actually called up with his grandfather and a couple of his cousins to serve in the militia. And that's going to put them on this collision course with destiny. So it's again, there's a very long personal history behind that story, something I've taken an interest in for a very long time, even though for a while I had sworn I would never write a Civil War novel, because that literature tends to get nitpicked a lot by statisticians and people. But it's a very personal story for mine, and was very, the fact that it was young boys and old men, and especially family groups, because they were drawn from local communities, put me in the mind of my grandfathers, both of whom I had a very close relationship as a kid. And there's a lot of them in that book. People who knew them have remarked to me about how they're like, oh, that's just like, your granddad JL just jumping off the page, or your granddad Ed just jumping off the page. Is actually one of my grandfather's flags from his funeral on the shelf behind me here. But I was interested in that angle, the family dynamic, and again, the home front on the Civil War, which is often neglected in favor of, kind of big flashy battles and cavalry charges, but also ordinary people, because we have gotten, the Gone with the Wind perspective, but that's like the Bill Gates perspective on the economy or business world nowadays. I was much more interested in exploring the yeomanry, which was my ancestors, again, free farmers, who they're independent family farmers. They have their own farm. They don't own slaves. They make just enough to kind of get by and, sort of live their lives out that way, which is what frames the novel, which is how you kind of chart the change to this family over the war. So thank you again for hosting this. I think I've gone on a little bit longer than I meant to, but readers have really, really responded to this book in a way that means a lot to me, because it's a story that meant a lot to me. But so I hope some of y'all at least check that out. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Jordan. That's always so interesting to hear about the inspiration, and especially when it comes from such personal experience. So thank you for sharing that with us and your talents with us. Our next speaker is Deb Richardson Moore. So Deb is the author of 4 fiction titles and a memoir, The Weight of Mercy, about her early years as a pastor at the Triune Mercy Center in Greenville, South Carolina. A former national award-winning reporter for the Greenville News, Deb is a popular speaker at book clubs, universities, and churches, and I'll add libraries. She has won numerous awards for community involvement, including the 2017 Leadership Greenville Distinguished Alumni Award, and being named one of Greenville's 50 most influential people by Greenville Business Magazine in 2013. A graduate of Wake Forest University, Deb and her husband live in Greenville. Thank you for joining us, Deb.
Thank you, Rachel. Okay, am I on? Can you?
You're on.
Good. Hi, we are so, all of us, I think I can speak to all of us when I tell you readers how excited we are that you wanted to join us this evening. As she said, I am a former reporter for the Greenville News and the retired pastor of Triune Mercy Center. My first book, The Weight of Mercy, came out in 2012. And it's a memoir about my first few years as pastor of Triune. And that's a church and ministry to homeless people right down the street from the library. So we deal with a lot of the same people. Mayor Knox White tells me he keeps a stack of those books in his office to give to visitors to Greenville. And I really appreciate that because the book talks mostly about Greenville's homeless population, which is not something a mayor usually wants to focus on. My publisher, Lion Hudson, is in England. And so after The Weight of Mercy had been out for about a year, they asked if I would write a sequel. And I said, I really didn't want to do that, but I'd always wanted to write murder mysteries. So they were like, but they agreed to bring out the next 3 books, which make up the Brannigan Powers mystery series. Brannigan is a newspaper reporter who works alongside a homeless man to solve murders. Malachi lives in a tent city that I borrowed extensively from the encampment that once resided under the Pete Hollis Corridor Bridge. I spent many, many hours under that bridge. Well, those books are The Cantaloupe Thief, The Cover Story, and Death of a Jester. And I loved being able to teach some things about homelessness in the form of entertaining mysteries. At least I hope they're entertaining. When I started contemplating my newest book, Murder Forgotten, I wanted to do something completely different, something darker. So here it is, and you can, I really like the cover because it gives you that really kind of dark, menacing feeling. It's set partially in a creaky old family home on Sullivan's Island and partially on the chilly eastern seaboard of Scotland. It's a standalone mystery about a famous writer who is losing her memory. Juliana Burke has something of a secret weapon, what her family calls her wanderings. And there are episodes in which when she's writing, she goes so deep into a book that it's almost a fugue state. And she wakes up on the beach or in a nearby church cemetery or on Charleston's Battery with no memory of how she got there. But when she does wake up, she's energized with all these ideas for her newest plot. Well, as I was writing her story, she was writing her 7th book, and her book was called Murder Forgotten. So there's a plot within the plot. So what's Murder Forgotten all about? Juliana's beloved husband, who's her first reader and business manager, is murdered in their beach house. Faced with the double whammy of her wanderings and her fading memory, Juliana panics. Deep in the throes of her own plot, could she have become confused and killed her husband? You have to read it to find out. Thanks again.
Thank you, Deb. I love that, ending us on a cliffhanger. And it's great to hear too how you can pivot your writing, your different writing styles, and try something darker, try something different. That's wonderful. Okay, so our next author is Kimberly Sims. And I'm just going to introduce you to her. Kimberly Sims' literary voice is rooted in the Southern tradition of storytelling, informed by her British and Southern lineage. She's an award-winning poet who's been featured on PBS and TEDx. She was the 2016 Carl Sandburg National Historic Site Writer in Residence. In her debut book of poems, Lindy Lee, Songs on Mill Hill, Kimberly chronicles the lives of textile workers in the Piedmont with historical accuracy and imaginative insight. These are poems of sorrow, joy, and redemption that linger in the heart. She is a Pushcart Prize nominee, and her work is included in the South Carolina Poetry Archives at Furman University. Thank you for joining us, Kimberly.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me today. This has been such a treat and a joy to hear about all these wonderful books. I would like to be a novelist one day myself, but poems are a lot shorter than novels. So I have really been, it's a lot easier to edit a poem than a novel. So I have a lot of admiration for all of you. Well, my book is called Lindy Lee, Songs on Mill Hill. And this is a book I really did about 10 years of research It is very historically accurate. It actually features photographs from the 1910s and 1920s. So if you are a history buff, then this is something that you would probably enjoy. I have a lot of people tell me that even though they're not really normally into poetry, they really enjoyed the book because they learned so much about the local history in Greenville, particularly in that 1910, 1920 period. The book focuses on a 10-year-old girl who starts working in the sawmill, and she follows her in her life. And so if you kind of want to learn about what it would have been like as a kid to work in the textile mill and to grow up and have your own kids work in the textile mill, this might be an interesting book for you to check out. I wanted to read a poem because they're only a minute long. So I thought I would just share one very quickly. This is called The Best Year in Movies, and most of these poems are set like in 1918 and very similar time as far as like a difficult time for America. And a lot of the book focuses on the ways that people found escape and how do you find joy when you're going through really tough times. So that's what this poem, most of these poems in this book are about. How do you escape from a tough life? So this is called The Best Year in Movies. If you're a movie buff, you know that I think even Gone with the Wind, all kinds of things came out that year. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. And it has a little epitaph. All the good that ever came into this world came from fools with faith. Lips red as Garbo, struggling for a cause, dancing, dancing, and falling against love in Paris, New York, traveling the globe with Fred Astaire all the time with perfect hair. Dorothy, I too want to go home. I want to prance lintless. I want to click my heels, glittered and gay, not dripping sweat at the frame. 1939, this mean, pitiful decade will soon exhale while America stretches towards another war, the wretched depression still at our door. I'm 16, I click my heels 6 days a week. I've never felt silk stockings or perfumed hand cream. DC Capitol seems like a dream. It's 1939, the best year in movies. I'll be the movie heroine and you be Fred Astaire. We'll go dancing, dancing all the time with perfect hair. So thank you for letting me throw a poem into the middle of all this fiction. Normally on a Thursday, I would be on the Facebook page Carolina Poets, where I host a weekly poetry event that features 3 published authors. So if you are into poetry, please join us any Thursday. It broadcasts on the Facebook page live. And you can get my book on my website at KimberlySims.com. You can also get it at M. Judson. And of course, check it out from the library. If you go to my website tonight, there's actually a special deal for the first few books that get sold. So definitely check that out. And just thank you again for having me, onto the show.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. What a treat. A surprise poetry reading. That was wonderful. And I'm so glad that we had some representation of poetry too. And so stay tuned for National Poetry Month in April. Of course, the library will be doing some fun events for that as well. So thank you, Kimberly. Our next author is Catherine Smith. Catherine Smith is an award-winning author of nonfiction biographies and historical mystery books who lives in Anderson, South Carolina. A graduate of Daniel High School in Central and the University of Georgia, she worked as a newspaper journalist and nonprofit executive director before devoting her time to writing. Her nonfiction books have been published by Simon & Schuster and Evening Post Books, while she publishes her mysteries, co-written with Kelly Durham of Clemson, on the Amazon.com platform. Catherine is a popular public speaker who's given more than 300 talks in the past 3 years in venues ranging from the FDR Presidential Library and Museum in Hyde Park, New York, to the Charleston Library Society, to civic clubs, book clubs, and senior communities in 8 states. She was featured on a panel at the Greenville Library's Local Author Expo in 2020, discussing her biography, Gertie. Catherine is married to Leo Smith, her college sweetheart. They have 2 grown children and 6 grandchildren. She's the author of The Gatekeeper, Missy LeHand, FDR, and the Untold Story of the Partnership That Defined a Presidency. Gertie, The Fabulous Life of Gertrude Sanford Legendre, heiress, socialite, spy. the Missy Lahan Mystery Series, co-authored with Kelly Durham. And her forthcoming book is Bootleggers and Baptists, a Prohibition Expedition Through the South with Cocktails. Thank you for joining us, Catherine.
Thank you so much. This has been so much fun. I've already jotted down several books that I'm going to buy after this, and I've read. Deb and I just met recently, and I have read all of her books, which I just love and highly recommend. And I love the poems so much because I'm a huge movie buff. And yes, 1939 was the big year for movies. So I am just as drawn to nonfiction as fiction writing, which I think makes me a little unusual. I don't write memoir, I write biographies. So I started out with The Gatekeeper in 2016. This is the biography of Marguerite LaHand, who was FDR's private secretary, Girl Friday, and actually the only woman to serve as White House Chief of Staff. I just was fascinated with her because I couldn't imagine a better job than to work for FDR, who I just revere, and live in the White House. And then when I discovered she died when she was only 47 years old, I went, maybe not, but I'd like to read a book about her. And since there wasn't one, I wrote it. And with all the dumb luck in the world, I got a New York agent who sold it to Simon & Schuster, and I was an overnight success at age 60. But anyway, that has been wonderful, and that's introduced me to this whole world of Roosevelt scholars and enthusiasts, which I continue to enjoy. My next biography, Gertie, is a very different biography. It was published in Charleston by Evening Post Books, which is the book publishing arm of the Post and Courier and Evening Post Industries. And it's the probably the most amazing South Carolina woman you've never heard of. She was an heiress. She was a big game hunter. She was an explorer. She was a flapper on the Riviera with the Fitzgeralds in the 1920s. And she was the first American woman in uniform captured by the Nazis during World War II. Spent 6 months as a POW and then escaped over the Swiss border. So, and at this point, she was only 43 and lived to be almost 98. So you can imagine what the rest of her life was like. And then at the same time, I guess after The Gatekeeper came out and in between that and publishing Gertie, I started writing a mystery series with Kelly Durham. The first one is Shirley Temple is Missing. And in the last 3 years, we've published 4 altogether. The President's Birthday Ball Affair. This is the best title. Eleanor Roosevelt Goes to Prison. And then just recently, FDR's Convention Conspiracy. And in all of these books, Kelly and I take Missy as our true historic character and turn her into a kind of Nancy Drew of the New Deal. And then aided and sometimes thwarted, well, aided with a FBI agent, sometimes thwarted by a very desperate newspaper reporter who'll do anything for a story named Joan Roswell. They're involved in all kinds of capers. There's not always someone killed in our books. In fact, there were only 2 murders in the 4 books. But they always have a political angle, and they always have a movie star in them. So obviously the first movie star was Shirley Temple. Then we had Ginger Rogers, Ida Lupino, and then the most recent one, my favorite, Betty Davis, who all have roles in the story. They're kind of cozies. We don't use any bad language, and there's no overt descriptions of sex, though Joan Roswell does manage to have her little adventures with each book. But we want them to be clean, and teenagers could probably enjoy them if they liked history at all. But I really enjoy the historical research that goes into each of them. Kelly is a World War II buff and also a serious history of World War II and also of the film industry. So he's a wonderful writing partner. We write our books by email. We publish them on the Amazon platform, and the cover designs are done by we went to high school together with another high school classmate who lives in Italy. So he does these beautiful original covers, and it all kind of makes our books look like a series rather than, something that's just been pasted together. And I'll be talking about the book Baptist and Bootleggers in February. That one will be coming out in June, and that's been a real hoot to write, as you can imagine, because I've had to do so much research in bars. Anyway, so I am open to questions, and thank you for this opportunity. And I've enjoyed hearing all of your writing stories. So interesting.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Yes, definitely come back to hear her tell us more about that research process at her talk. Thank you for sharing that story with us. And so now we have one more author who's going to do an introduction. So Susan Zerinda. After teaching literature, composition, and creative writing to thousands of high school and college students for 33 years, Susan Beckham Zerinda turned her attention to putting a novel in her heart on paper, the genesis of which was a short story that won the South Carolina Fiction Prize some years ago. Among other accolades, her debut novel, Bells for Eli, that's Mercer University Press, was selected as a Winter 2020 Okra Pick by the Southern Independent Booksellers Alliance and has been nominated for a Pushcart Prize for 2021. Susan taught English for 33 years on the college level and at the high school level to AP students. She's won a number of regional short fiction awards, such as the South Carolina Fiction Prize twice, the Porter Fleming Competition, and many more. She's been published in numerous literary journals. Susan received her undergraduate and master's degree in English and now works as a book publicist, managing media relations for Magic Time Literary Publicity. Writing and the love of literature have been central in her life since early childhood, perhaps beginning when her father read poetry to her and her brother at bedtime. Thank you for joining us, Susan.
Oh, thank you for having me. And even though sometimes you think, oh gosh, you got the last name Zerinda, so you're going to go last. How much fun it's been for me. What a wonderful eclectic group we have. And thank you, Rachel, for inviting me to be part of it. And thanks to the library and Emory's as well. And since at my mature age, I have a debut novel, I am going to focus really on it. It debuted with the pandemic in March of 2020. And for those of you who are around my age and are baby boomers, or even if you are not, who recalls eating moon pies in the sun with chocolate dripping down your fingers at the local swimming pool while the eagle touched down on the moon, its tranquility base? Or junior high parties where black lights made your teeth glow green while Agent Orange laid waste to the jungles in Vietnam? Or making out at drive-in movies in high school while hippies gathered for love-ins in the Golden Gate Park? This was my era, and it was a contradictory time, as all of us know, teetering between devotion to conventional values from the 1950s and the desire to do what you feel in the 60s and 70s. And in my novel, Bells for Eli, the town where my main characters live and other settings are largely imagined, but they are based on the realities and of the time and the locale of my own youth. My main characters are Adeline, she's called Delia Green, and her first cousin, Ellison, who's called Eli Winfield. They live in the fictitious town of Green Branch, South Carolina, during this momentous period, and they are deeply affected by their time and place. The novel explores first cousins, Delia and Eli's relationship, and the lives around them shaped by Eli's tragic childhood accident. And in this small town, southern setting of the 60s and 70s, Bells for Eli is actually inspired by an incident that actually happened to my first cousin, Danny, when he was very young on his second birthday. And as is the case in the novel with my character Eli, my real life cousin saw a Coca-Cola bottle sitting on the porch steps at his home, and he drank from it. But instead of Coke, the bottle was filled with Red Devil Lye. It's a chemical that has properties, I researched all this to make sure of it, it has properties like helium. And so according to my parents' story and the story, of course, down through the years, my uncle had been placing balloons over the neck of the bottle to inflate them for his son's birthday party. So Eli in the novel, my cousin survived the accident, but his life was forever changed. Now, unlike Eli's cousin, Adeline, or Delia Green, who's the protagonist and first-person narrator of the novel, I did not grow up in the same town as my cousin. His accident took place in Plainfield, New Jersey, in fact, and I was living and have always lived in South Carolina. So most of what I know of his challenging childhood came to me secondhand long after my own childhood. My novel is an imagining of Eli and Delia growing up across the street from each other in this small town neighborhood as Delia becomes Eli's defender and only friend, really, when Eli is tormented and bullied for his disfigurement and his weakness. He has a tracheotomy in his throat. He has a strange string that goes behind his ear and goes who knows where. He doesn't smell good because he has a hole in his stomach through which he is fed. These are all the things of his childhood. But within this, it presents the opportunity for Eli and Delia to develop a very deep and uncommon love as they come of age in this powerfully transitional time in American history. In adolescence, Eli appears normal on the outside. All of those things from his childhood are gone. He is a heartbreaker with a double standard, and he guards Delia's vulnerability when she ventures into a destructive romantic relationship. Determined as Eli is to rescue his beloved cousin, Delia, she's equally committed to saving Eli when he falls into the wrong crowd enamored with drugs. Because though he looks normal on the outside, he bears the emotional and physical scars of his childhood accident. Their relationship as adolescents grows into an incomparable love, blossoming into an intimacy that cannot be, because they know to love one's cousin is taboo, and that's one of the big conflicts in the novel. And the novel concludes in their college years with Delia's discovery of a shocking family secret and truths about Eli she has never known when she thought that she knew him better than anyone else on earth. So thank you again. And I guess I could show you the cover too. It's an awfully pretty cover, Bells for Eli. There's an important setting in the book called Magnolia Manor. It's Eli's grandmother's antebellum home in the country. And I think Mercer did just a beautiful job of kind of taking that and making the cover. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, Susan. All of you have done such a wonderful job of getting me completely hooked on these books that I have to find out what happens. Wonderful introductions from all of you. We're about to start our Q&A portion. So authors, if you can get yourselves ready to answer some questions, it is now the Q&A time. We're going to turn it over to you, our viewers, for some of these questions. For simplicity's sake, please continue to type it in the chat box, the questions, so that I can read them out to our authors. And please also keep yourselves muted while the authors are speaking. That'll make things easier for everyone. So let's pull up. We've got quite the list of questions that have been coming in. Some of them will be for individual authors, and of course, some will be for the group. First of all, let's get you started on one that I think is appropriate for winter reading. You're lost in a snowstorm and take shelter in an abandoned cabin. Inside, you find a library filled with every book ever written. What book do you read while you wait for the storm to pass? That's for all authors.
That's a great question.
The Great Gatsby.
That's exactly the one I was going to say, Catherine. It is the book I taught the most and loved the most because it is just perfect.
Mm-hmm.
If it's all the books ever written, I would find like, you know, some Sumerian text. I'd be like, what's in here? Like, what's been lost to history? I'll read that.
That's great.
I think I'd read the Chronicles of Narnia and look out the window at the snow.
Yeah.
I love that. Some great answers. All right, let me ask, here's an individual question for Paulette. For Paulette, was it easier writing about the place where you grew up?
You know, it was easy in the sense that I was so interested in it and emotionally involved in the material and in the place. And I'd lived away from Greenville for so long, and I was in some ways so happy to be back on my home turf. It was hard in that I was writing about an era that I had been a baby and child in, and so I really didn't know. And it was also the history of that era was so interesting and important to me. One of the hardest things was what to leave out. I mean, by the time I had spent so much time in the South Carolina room at the library and gone through so much research there and was so interested in all of that myself as I discovered it, that I just had a tendency to want to keep putting that more and more and more into the novel until my sister-in-law read a draft and she said, I want to know what happens to my peeps, the people. So I had to cut out a lot of the historical information and follow the characters and try to make the historical information integrated into their lives in a way that wasn't just trying to tell people about it and educate people about it the way I'd educated myself.
Can I make a comment too, just about Paulette's topic? I actually came across a newspaper article about that same topic when I was doing my research, and of the, you know, the coverage in the newspaper of what happened to Willie Earl, and the newspaper writing is pretty, it's just really interesting in itself too.
It's really interesting, and it's been covered extensively by both the newspaper and that book that well, I don't think I mentioned it. There is a nonfiction book called The Last Lynching by Will Gravely about it. But yeah, there's been a lot of attention to Willie Earl in Greenville in the last, I don't know, maybe 10 years, I think.
But even the original, like the original articles, like when it first happened, are like,
that's true too. Yeah.
Crazy.
That's true too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Okay. This question is for all authors. What do you know now that you wish you knew before you started writing your first novel?
Don't make your main character unlikable. People will not want to read it, and you will have to start over.
I think to focus on your career in the long term and not just on the one book that you're writing right then. I think as a debut author, it's easy to think that it's this book or nothing. This is your one story, and you put all your eggs in that one basket. And that actually can make it really stressful because it's a lot of pressure on yourself. And you feel like if you don't get this right, then it's shot. And that's not true at all. I think being an author is about stretching, you know, your passion and your skill out over a really long period of time. And you want to keep writing, hopefully, and dig into all of those stories that you have inside you. So not putting so much, you know, not making that one project that you're working on your most precious thing, and recognizing that if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, and there's more stories that you can tell.
Since I work a little bit with book publicity, I will say, and I kind of knew this ahead, but I think a lot of authors first time, and of course I'm a debut novelist, but we're unprepared for the amount of marketing that becomes necessary to get your book in front of readers. And, you know, the world wasn't like this 25 years ago. The publishers did all the work, but that's not the case now. And there are many, many more books out there. And so I think when you write, if you do intend to self-publish or, you know, have an agent and be published, get your head wrapped around what you got ahead of you, because the marketing and the outreach for me has been just as much work as the writing of the novel.
I have some advice for writers who want to write a series. If you think you're going to be writing a series, develop character sheets for your characters, recording basic statistics about them, like their date of birth, how old they are, where they went to school, because, you know, by book 4, you don't always remember what their favorite color was. And then you have to go back and look that up. And it's much easier if you have developed a character sheet, a fact sheet on the characters, with that kind of information.
I agree with Sally, and always go back and check your character's eye colors, because I know I have a tendency to flip them in different books. So I'll have to go back and see or green or like hazel.
But you know, Louise Penny breaks that rule, and she's so successful she can. I mean, she's had characters whose children disappeared and their characteristics changed, and you know, it's like, ah, well, he had children back then, but 5 books later, who remembers?
Yeah, like you say, she can do that.
Yeah, she can get away with that.
I would say that, am I unmuted? Yeah. I would say this is more about writing process, but it's a mysterious process. It's not all under your intellectual control or your conscious control. And a lot of it, or some of it, is has to do with your intuition and your imagination, and working back and forth through those without really being totally in control of it. It's a process, and you have to kind of trust that process. And I would say, you know, write the book that you want to read, because if you're going to be successful at it, it's got to be something that you really forget about success to some extent, or at least I certainly did. And, you know, you write what you really want to read and what you really are sort of passionately interested in.
Yeah, I would, piggybacking on what Paulette said, I always think about, I have a very, very, very tough inner critic. And she's always saying, this is so boring. Why are you doing this? Nobody wants to read this. And, you know, you are wasting your time. Why don't you go turn on CNN and give us all a break? And I just think we have got to silence her and we have to figure out ways to push past that and be gentle with ourselves.
I found that a glass of wine works pretty well to make my inner critic go to sleep.
I use chocolate.
That works too.
Martinis.
That's great. Okay, let me ask, this one's a quick one, directed at Paul Michael Garrison. Is your book considered a cozy mystery? They're interested in what genre you would classify it in.
That's, I guess, an interesting question. I've seen it labeled as a cozy on some websites. I wouldn't really consider it a cozy. I don't think it really meets those hallmarks. The detective is on the police force. Usually in a cozy mystery, you kind of have an amateur detective who, you know, is kind of falling into the mystery. I kind of just tell people that I consider it a classic mystery. It's, from that standpoint, I think of it as being a very traditional mystery with a professional detective at the helm of the novel.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, this one is for all authors. How do you stay motivated over the many hours of work which it takes to complete a novel, particularly for those who are working full-time in another position?
I think, again, you have to love what you're doing. Like, if you are just thinking, I got to go pro with this, I got to get it published, here's, you know, my list of things to do, that's a great goal, but it's a really bad motivator. If you are enjoying what you're doing, if you love the story you're writing, if you love the process, you're going to want to come back to it, even when it's hard. You might want to take a break from it at some points, but you'll want to come back to it. The motivation has to be because it energizes you, because it recharges you. If it doesn't sort of light that spark in you, then yeah, it's going to be a drudgery. Also, having a writers group or a group of people that you can, regularly meet with and read some of your work to. A lot of times they get invested in. Peer pressure is a great motivator. If you're like, oh man, I got to get something done so I can bring it to group, or I'll just be like, I'm sorry, I was lazy this week, so having that sort of outward accountability can help too.
That's how my writing partner worked, having a writing partner, a co-author, because, oh my God, he's so much more prolific than I am. I'll get 12 pages a day, and I've just got to gallop to keep up with it. But it's just such a thrill to open my email and read what Kelly has written in the book, and then I'm writing the next scene or, doing the transitions. But that's it's just a thrill to read what's happened to our book overnight that I didn't even know was going to happen.
It may sound strange, but one of the things that helps motivate me is routine, which we kind of think of routine as being a drudgery type thing rather than a motivator. But I found that there's a kind of a tipping point in getting into a writing routine where it does seem like a drudgery. Like, okay, I've got to put in my time today. I've got to sit down. I'm tired from a long day at my day job, but, now I'm going to try and carve out some of my evening to write. But once it becomes part of that routine, if you take too long of a break, you find that you actually miss it because it's part of your life. It's part of what you do. And, that actually becomes encouraging because, like Emily said, it kind of becomes a passion or a burn for you. I don't have a critique group right now, but I do use a group of test readers. And my beta readers are also encouraging because I like to get that feedback, and I feed them a couple chapters at a time. So I start to get a little bit of feedback, and their excitement in the project helps me to stay excited in the project.
Yeah.
I think also reading and just making sure, you're reading not just within your genre, but broadly as well. I know when I've had trouble writing certain aspects of my books, whether it's, a romantic subplot or keeping the pages turning, keeping the suspense and the tension. So much of that can be helped by reading books that have that as a strength in the genre. So if I'm having trouble with a romantic subplot, I read a romance book. If I'm having trouble with the suspense, I read a thriller or a mystery. And if I'm having trouble with world building, I'm going to be reading sci-fi and fantasy. So it's plus it keeps us, I think, as writers, we're often focused on our productivity and producing, but I also think that we have to be good consumers as well to enhance our, but also be a responsible member of the literary world as a whole. Because we want people to read our books, and so we also need to be reading other people's work as well and broadening our perspective in that way. So I definitely think reading a lot and reading very broadly is a really big motivator.
Yeah,
for me personally.
I really agree with that. And I would say that to a large extent, writing comes from reading. I think more than people really understand or realize. And sometimes when you're reading too, your subconscious is actually working on what you're writing, and it can kind of give you some ideas that you wouldn't think of if you were just sitting there trying to write. And also, if you're really stuck and don't have something new to write or just don't know what to write, to try to really copy someone's first paragraph, maybe put in your own characters and situation or something, but copy their sentence structure, just like using it as training wheels or something until you can get going. It just sort of takes all the burden off of you of trying to look I'm writing, you got to sort of fool yourself on that a little bit, but
that's neat.
And I agree. I think the more you read, the years and years of teaching literature for me, that's what I call my MFA. I mean, I think we learn by, you can call it osmosis, you can call whatever, but it just sinks deep down in your soul, and it's there. You have to read, and you have to read widely.
Yeah.
There's a really good podcast that I listen to where the host interviews a different writer every week, and they come from all different genres. There's fiction writers and people who write various kinds of nonfiction and theology and philosophy and poetry and devotionals and you name it. But the question he always ends on, I just love, and it's, what writers make you want to write? So, and it's interesting how many writers repeatedly pop up across a whole bunch of different writers' answers, but find those and just keep going back to them. They don't even have to be somebody you write like one of mine is Charles Portis, the guy who wrote True Grit, who just died last year. And he wrote 5 novels over the course of about 40 years, and they're all gems, and I don't write anything like him, but reading his books are so good, it makes me want to like sit down and hammer out a chapter of just something, just to kind of be doing the same thing he did. And I want to second what Paul Michael said earlier too. Routine is such a help, and it can help you get through hard days, but it can also be a motivator, like he was saying, and that's especially the case if you've got kind of an obsessive personality like I do. And once you've established a routine and you don't want to break it, and it actually kind of makes you angry to miss a day, that's a good place to be in if you're trying to do the marathon run of completing a novel. The one I'm revising, just as a testimonial, the one I'm revising right now is like 120,000 words. And I decided to start writing it when we had a 2-week-old at home, which was a bad time to begin anything, but I finished it. And just getting that first week in, I was good. And I was able to, just slog away from June to October of, I guess 2 years ago now. And missing a day hurt so bad I had to get back in there the next day.
All right, wonderful advice, everyone. Thank you. Now, this next question is specifically addressed to Sally Hanley, but I think it can apply to all of you. You speak passionately about your character's development. Do you find yourself developing as a person as you write your books?
I develop as a person as I write my book, or do my characters develop?
They're asking if you develop yourself.
No, I think I'm about as developed as I'm going to get. The characters absolutely develop and they become their own persons for me. But I think I'm a little too old. I'm done developing. Thank you. No, I don't think I could say yes to that.
Anybody else? Are you all fully developed?
Maybe not fully realized. One thing I have noticed is I start to notice common themes in my work. So I'll start to notice that I put like the theme of like family. I'll put different sort of themes in my book, and when I see those resurging, I'm like, oh, that must be a really strong value I have, because I didn't set out, and I'd be interested to know if other authors do, but like I don't intentionally put themes and symbolism in my books, but I absolutely do put them in. And there are common threads throughout them.
I'll piggyback on that. I think it's more of that for me, is that my writing will maybe reveal more about me rather than my personal development through it. I remember at one point, a friend who read the manuscript before it was published commented on kind of a worldview philosophical angle that they picked up from the novel. And it was really surprising to me, because it was like Evie said, I hadn't intended to include that in the book, but when they described it back to me, I was like, yes, that's how I feel. That's what I think. And it was just how that was absorbed into the manuscript without effort.
I think for me, I started my first novel, Escape to Vindor, as it was just me imagining a way to sort of deal with some of the things I was dealing with and put it into a fictional world to kind of so it started off as me trying to work some things out in my life, and it took on a life of its own. And so, yes, I developed along with it because it was sort of like I set out this problem. How do I solve this problem of life? And then put it in a fantasy world. And so, because I was thinking about it in a more abstract way, it actually helped me to see the problems that I was having with anxiety and that sort of thing that I was struggling with. By casting it into a fantasy, it allowed me to see it in different ways. And actually, as I grew as a person, my conclusion to the book, my sort of solution to the problem, changed completely from when I started. I was just like, okay, here's a solution. And then as I lived more life, I was like, nope, that's not the solution. I'm rewriting the ending. So I think that for some authors, we're working out some of our own questions and maybe anxieties through what we're writing, and we learn along with it. So, we are developing the story, but it's coming back and helping us think through some of the things in our own lives.
I would say that not so much the writing process, but when you get out and start meeting people and promoting your book and talking to people, you have the most wonderful experiences, just so so expand your world. I'm basically retired, and since I started publishing in 2016, I've got to just go places I never imagined I'd get to go and meet so many interesting people. And you reach your point in your life, you think, I'm really not going to meet that many more new people in my life. So even though I'm never going to make any money on my books, it's just the enriching of my life has been incredible because of that. So it's a great gift.
All right. Here's a couple of questions. I'll just combine them into one for Emily Martin. Some people are asking a little bit of explanation about what is eco-fantasy. And then do any of your books have themes that have to do with conservation?
Yeah, so eco-fantasy is my editor's more professional way of what I was calling fantasy adventure for nature nerds. And he sort of meshed, kind of molded that into eco-fantasy, which just sounds a little bit more professional, I think. But basically, it's a sense of having the natural world play a pretty significant role, not just as a backdrop to the story, but having it be a thematic element, and in some cases even a type of character in a way. It very much influences the plot of the story, the internal and external struggles that the characters are going through. And then all of it as well, the natural world sort of serves as my springboard for everything from naming my characters to the cultures that I'm growing in these countries and these worlds. So the natural world is sort of a thread that connects all those things together. There are conservation themes throughout my books. The first trilogy, the first book of my first trilogy, the protagonist, like I said at the beginning, is sort of a ranger character. And so she's very attuned to the world around her, both its sort of abstract beauty, but also its inherent practicality and how she can use it. She's an herbalist. She is very intimately aware of her surroundings and how they can be of use to her, but also of just how small and humble she is in that grandeur as well. So so that's definitely a theme there. And then in Sunshield, my most recent book, and Floodpath, its sequel, there are definitely themes of desecration of nature having effects beyond what maybe people expected them to have. So it's a very structured hierarchical society, and there's a lot of exploitation in both people, but also in the land as well. And characters start to realize that maybe some of these things that people sort of took for granted, or that had just become sort of rote parts of their society, were having these effects on the natural world that were then snowballing into these much more massive effects, which I think we can probably see unfolding around us in our real world today. So yeah, there's always elements of conservation and just nature is cool thematic elements in general. So yeah, nature nerd for, fantasy adventure for nature nerds is the summary.
Great, thank you. That does help. So here's a question for everyone. Those of you who write historical fiction or work that takes place in another location that maybe you're not familiar with, when you were in the middle of writing a scene or a chapter and you come across something that needs researching, how do you keep from getting bogged down with the stopping and the starting of your writing process?
Well, I think there's constant stopping and starting with your writing process. I mean, I just keep the books that I use for historical reference nearby. I'm constantly getting up and down and checking stuff. So I think that's just part of the whole nature of writing. You don't just sit there and just get it out, and that may be because I'm coming from that as a historian as well as a historical fiction writer. Jordan, what do you think? Because that would be another question that would.
Yeah, it's the approach is going to be different if you're writing, a nonfiction historical work. So I mean, there you're going to want to have all your resources at hand. You're going to want to be able to check everything as you go, because you don't want to get 20 pages deep into something and realize you overlooked something that is going to change your perspective on whatever. But for fiction, I find, because I can lose myself in the research, at some point I just have to kind of have to stop and write the thing, and any subsequent research I'm going to do for later drafts. So I might, if it's something minor, so in my Civil War novel, for instance, what color was the Georgia state flag in 1864? Well, there was no official flag, so there was actually a couple. That kind of thing I can kind of grab and keep moving. The temptation, though, is to just kind of park on every little detail, and you'll never get a book written that way. At least a fictional one. So I find I have to just, at some point, get to a spot where I'm ready to write the book, and then go back with the fine-tooth comb for all that other stuff later. It's different for everybody, but that's my approach, because if I don't do that, I won't finish it.
I think of it as putting up a Christmas tree, and you get all the, you get your tree out of the box, you get all your branches there, you've got your substructure, and then you go back and put the ornaments on it, which is all the little details that bring things out, like you're saying, the color of the Georgia flag.
That's a good way to put it.
I have to do a lot of research for science fiction as well. So my character actually goes to another planet at the beginning of the story. And so, there were some parts where I was like, well, how exactly does the atmosphere work? How exactly, how many miles away? I was had to study the structure of galaxies and things like that to make it, because it was important to me that there be some believable elements in there, even though it's mostly a fantasy story. The planet she goes to has 6 moons in the sky. So I was like, how would that look? If you were standing on a planet, how would 6 moons look to you? Would you be able to see them during the day? Does it depend on the atmosphere of the planet? So for me personally, I did a lot of that research in kind of a chunk. And then when I came to issues throughout the text, I would just leave a line that was like, insert distance from moon here. And then I would do a control find function at the end, and I would go to all of my inserts, and then I would do my scientific research and consult with people who have more knowledge than me. Because otherwise, like Catherine and Jordan were saying, it's easy to get bogged down, because for me, that was fascinating. I love reading about science and research.
Just come up with some type of a place marker that you use to search later on if you don't want to stop the flow of your writing. Just come up with a place marker that you can search and replace, just as Evie just said. And even for simple things, the spelling of a word. So that's the best way.
I do a ton of research, general research before when I start my books. I love research, I love history. And so I find I do way more research than I really need in my books. And then like the rest of you, as we go along, we kind of you need a certain detail about something specific so you can get off your writing and get onto the research. But if I'm not careful, I get so bogged down in the research that I never get my book written. So I do have to say, okay, enough is enough. You got to start writing But and one thing I do sometimes is I'll highlight when I come to a spot and I need something specific, I will highlight that line in yellow. And that just jumps out on the page. I can go back to it later and it's, oh, there's this yellow line there. I need to find something specific. And that always.
I'll do that too.
Sometimes my book is put in the category of historical fiction because it takes place in the 60s and 70s. And because I lived in that time, I didn't think I would do any research, but I did a lot of research because my mind has forgotten everything. But, you know, I would kind of go back and forth. I would need something. Oh, was that a Snoopy lunchbox or whatever? I would need something and I would just jump off and do some research. But one thing that happened for me is that I think kind of going back and forth between looking up things from the 60s and 70s and coming back is that it put me there. I was living. And there was one night, Eli's favorite song is A Whiter Shade of Pale. And one night I was listening to it on YouTube and I listened to it about 3 times and I was just completely moved by it. And I think, well, actually it was Stairway to Heaven he was listening to in that chapter, but I needed to describe the song and it really moved me. And I think it helped me tremendously to write that scene with that song.
All right. Thank y'all so much. I wish we could keep going to hear even more from our authors, but I see our time is running short. Thank you for sharing your time and your talent with us this evening. If you'd like to know more about these authors, be sure to check out their websites and check out their available books from the library as well. If you'd like to know more, make sure that you are checking out the greenvillelibrary.org. That's our website. Check out the events page and also the adult virtual activities page. So we have both our live events and we have on-demand events like this one will become on demand after we record this. And so you don't want to miss any of these opportunities, including those Meet the Author events that I mentioned earlier that are going to be in January and February. So make sure that you're signed up. Also to follow us on social media, follow us at Greenville Library for Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, GCLS Library. Also sign up for our e-newsletter. That way you never miss another exciting virtual event. So thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to the authors, and we hope that we'll be seeing you all again very soon. And thank you for a wonderful evening. So
Thank
sign
you,
up.
Rachel.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's fun.
Don't
Appreciate
forget
it.
what you're reading.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you all. Good night.
Good night.
Night.